In Tyburn Road a man there lived, a just and honest life, and there he might have lived still, if so had pleased his wife. But she to vicious ways inclined, a life most wicked led. With tailors and with tinkers too, she oft defiled his bed. Those are just the first two verses to a song on the murder of Mr. Hayes. So the woman that you see there is a woman called Catherine Hayes. And she was the last recorded woman to be burned at the stake for petty treason, which is the murder of her husband. So this was a very unusual and very awful case. And this was in the year 1726. So Catherine Hayes, she basically met her husband, John Hayes, as when she was employed as a servant in the household. And the son, John Hayes, fell in love with her, and bit of a sort of a fairy tale, I suppose, in a way. They fell in love, they eloped, and they got married, and they moved to London. He was quite a successful pawnbroker, and she had 12 sons with him. Now, she claims later on, when it transpired what had happened, she said that he was abusive to her and murdered their newborn children. Anyway, in 1725, two men, who one of whom was claimed to have been the biological son of Catherine and John Hayes, who'd been adopted out, moved in as lodgers into their house. And allegedly, Catherine Hayes started having affairs with both of the men. So they're basically claiming that she had an affair with her own biological son, which I find hard to comprehend, but I suppose weirder things have happened and there are lots of sick people around. Nonetheless, that didn't seem to be the worst of it, because they apparently then decided to kill John Hayes, her husband. So he was killed. He was then dismembered by the trio, apparently, and then they discarded his body parts in a pond. And then his head was cast into the River Thames, which apparently then washed up later and was displayed in a churchyard in Westminster, which caused him to be identified by the general public. And then after that, the rest of his limbs and body parts were discovered. So obviously Catherine was arrested, along with the two other men who had been lodging. Hayes, Catherine there, she denied all knowledge of the murder, and she pleaded not guilty. But she was still found guilty, and she was convicted of what was then petty treason, which was basically murdering your husband. And she was, and the punishment for that, the execution method, was burning at the stake. So it was still the case at that time that if you committed petty treason, which was killing your husband, you could be burned as a woman. Of course, the same didn't apply for men killing their wives; they would just be hanged. But unfortunately, Catherine actually, because the idea was that you would strangle the victim first. They weren't supposed to be burned alive at the stake, but they didn't manage to strangle her properly, so she did end up being burned alive at the stake. There's a lovely image from the Old Bailey journals at the time of the trio cutting off John Hayes's head, because 18th century public were just as excited by morbid details as we are nowadays, and I suppose it was the equivalent of like true crime documentaries and titillating newspaper details that you might get nowadays about horrific crimes. And there you have another lovely etching of the head displayed of John Hayes in Westminster churchyard for all to see. And finally, this is the image of poor Catherine Hayes being burned alive at the stake after she was unsuccessfully strangled beforehand. I mean, you say unsuccessful, but I wonder if it was intentional, because obviously she was declared to be some sort of monster who was sleeping with her own biological son, as well as killing her husband in this horrific way. Now, I do wonder how much of this is actually true, and whether poor Catherine Hayes was as involved in this murder as it is claimed that she was. I mean, she pleaded non-guilty, of course, as she would do. But, the fact that she claimed that her husband had been abusive towards her and had killed their children, I think it's hard for us to, you know, even though this is a horrific crime, to really apportion blame to a woman who is suffering from abuse and who is traumatized and who has been subjected to such abuses for many years, as Catherine Hayes likely was, as most women were in those days, at the hands of their husbands, being the property of their husbands. And I think it's just very telling at the level of misogyny in the law that it's only women who kill their husbands who are subjected to this horrific execution method, rather than husbands killing their wives. These are all topics that I discuss on my tour, Jailbirds of Old London, talking about, you know, women's lives in the past in London and women who committed crimes, how they were viewed by the public, how they were viewed by society, by the law, and also how they were punished accordingly. And also looking at how this has changed today. You know, how do we view women criminals? I don't think there's been a huge amount of change, and some of these Victorian attitudes have carried on into the present day with our legal systems and our attitudes towards women criminals. And I'll also give you a chance to give me your opinion as well on our tour. So if you come along, you'll meet similar characters like this, not Catherine Hayes as such, but other characters like her from the 18th, 19th, early 20th century in London this Friday, the 11th of July, Jailbirds of Old London, booking now. Come along if you're interested in hearing some grisly details of true crimes in London and what the impact was back then and what the impact is on us today. I will post the link below. Hope to see you there.